2 years ago, he was untouchable. The most dominant badminton player on the planet. A man who didn't just win tournaments, he dismantled them. But today, as February 2026 begins, Viktor Axelsen sits at number 50 in the world rankings. Number 50. For a two-time Olympic champion, that number sounds like a tragedy. It sounds like the end of a story. But what if it's actually the beginning of something far more dangerous? What you're about to hear is not a story about decline. It's not a story about a champion fading into the background. This is the story of one of the greatest badminton players who ever lived, staring down injury, age, and an entirely new generation of hungry competitors, and choosing, deliberately and coldly, to reinvent himself entirely. This is the story of Viktor Axelsen in 2026. And by the time this is over, you'll understand why the rest of the world should be very, very worried. To understand where Viktor Axelsen is right now, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a lanky teenager from Odense, Denmark, who picked up a racket and seemed almost destined for greatness. From his early days on the BWF circuit, there was something different about Axelsen. Something that went beyond physical gifts, beyond the extraordinary wingspan, beyond the towering frame that stretched to 1.94 meters. There was a coldness to him on court, a calculation, a quiet, burning intelligence behind every shot he played. He climbed through the ranks methodically, absorbing losses, learning from every defeat as if he were correcting data rapidly. And then, somewhere around the early 2020s, something clicked. Viktor Axelsen didn't just become great. He became dominant in a way that badminton had rarely seen before. His signature pirouetting backhand smash became the shot that haunted opponents' dreams. His footwork, explosive,
went to a third and deciding game.
Effortless, covered every corner of that court as though the space belonged to him personally. He wasn't
Axelsen
just
again finished strongly.
He was controlling it. The Olympic gold in Tokyo. The continued reign at the top of the world rankings. Tournament after tournament, final after final. At his peak, facing Viktor Axelsen felt less like a competition and more like a controlled demolition. He didn't give opponents angles. He didn't give them hits. He didn't give them anything. In the world of badminton began to ask a question that felt almost uncomfortable to voice: is this man simply unbeatable? Then 2025 arrived. And everything changed. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruel thing about injury, it rarely announces itself with a single dramatic moment. It creeps in, a niggle here, a tightness there. For Axelsen, the warning signs had been building quietly beneath the surface of his performances. But in April of 2025, the body finally sent a message that could not be ignored. Endoscopic surgery for a disc herniation. His lower back, the engine room of every explosive movement, every leap, every powerful smash, had reached its limit. The recovery was brutal, not just physically, but psychologically. For an athlete who had spent years at the absolute pinnacle, suddenly being forced to slow down, to watch from the sidelines, to count the weeks of rehabilitation rather than tournament victories, that is a specific kind of suffering that only elite athletes truly understand. And just when it seemed the worst was behind him, severe nerve pain returned in late 2025, forcing him to withdraw from all remaining events that season. He came back to competition at the China Masters in September 2025. Still recovering, still finding his rhythm, and there, in the round of 16, a young Frenchman named Alex Lanier handed him a defeat that sent a message across the entire badminton world. 22-20, 15-21,
What a rally.
13-21. Axelsen, the great Viktor Axelsen, beaten by a player who represented exactly the high-pace, relentless new generation that was rising fast through the rankings. At the Denmark Open,
That's gone long.
He reached the semifinals, a bronze, by the tournament's classification. But in that semifinal, his own compatriot Anders Antonsen took him to a grueling 3-set battle that pushed every limit.
Bronze went to a third and deciding game.
Axelsen made a decision that surprised many in the sport. He withdrew from every remaining event
Axelsen
in late
again
2025.
finished strongly.
Not because he had to. Because he chose to. That decision tells you everything you need to know about the Viktor Axelsen of 2026. This is no longer a player chasing ranking points. This is no longer a man who needs to prove himself in every tournament on the calendar to feel valuable. This is a chess game master stepping away from casual games to prepare exclusively for the World Championship. Every withdrawal, every skipped tournament, every quiet week of training was a calculated move in a much longer game. And when 2026 arrived, the results of that decision became clear almost immediately. At the India Open in January, Axelsen stepped back onto the international stage and delivered the kind of performance that reminded the world exactly who they were dealing with. Lee Chuk-yu, a formidable opponent by any measure, was dispatched cleanly, 21-16, 21-8. Controlled, dominant, decisive. That wasn't just a victory. That was a statement. But here's what makes Axelsen's story in 2026 genuinely fascinating, and genuinely frightening for his opponents. He is not the same player he was at his peak. He knows that. He has accepted it, and rather than fight against the passage of time, he has done something far more intelligent. He has weaponized his experience. The Viktor Axelsen of 2026 plays differently. Where the younger version relied on explosive speed and overwhelming power to dictate every rally, the 2026 model is something more subtle and arguably more sophisticated. He builds rallies systematically, using that enormous frame not just to generate power, but to control length and height, to force opponents to move while he conserves energy. Every shot now has a purpose that goes beyond the immediate point. Every rally is designed to extract something from the opponent, their stamina, their confidence, their rhythm. He has spoken publicly about what he calls the 0.25-second advantage. By working specifically on anticipation drills, by reading the geometry of a rally a fraction of a second earlier, he compensates for the natural decline in raw foot speed that comes with age. It sounds like a small thing. In a sport where points are won and lost in fractions of a second, it is everything. And then there is what might be his most powerful evolution of all, his mind. Axelsen has described his approach to matches as treating them like an examination.
Axelsen again finished strongly.
Through his VA Academy, he studies opponents, patterns, tendencies, and weaknesses with the analytical precision of a scientist. He arrives at every match with a detailed understanding of what his opponent is likely to do under pressure, how they respond to specific situations, and where their game breaks down. As many coaches and analysts have noted, one of the hardest players in the world to tactically surprise. He is 32 years old. In athletic terms, that is deep into the veteran territory for a sport as physically demanding as badminton. But Axelsen is not competing against the calendar. He is competing against himself, and against a new generation of opponents who are beginning to define the future of the sport. And that brings us to perhaps the most interesting tension in his story right now, the French wave. Alex Lanier, Christo Popov, young, fearless, explosive, playing with exactly the kind of high-pace, high-intensity style that the younger Axelsen himself once used to dismantle the generation before him. There is a poetic irony there that is impossible to ignore. The weapon that made Viktor Axelsen great is now being turned against him by players young enough to be his students. Lanier's victory over him at the China Masters was not a fluke. It was a preview, a glimpse of what the new landscape looks like. But here is the question that no one can answer with certainty. What happens when a fully healthy, fully prepared Viktor Axelsen meets that challenge head-on? Because right now, sitting at number 50 in the world, he is essentially invisible from a rankings perspective. And yet every serious analyst, every experienced coach, every player who has stood across the net from him knows the truth. The number next to his name means nothing about what he is capable of. His biggest rivals are not ignoring him. If anything, they're watching him more carefully than ever. The 2026 season stretches ahead with the weight of enormous possibilities. Axelsen has confirmed publicly that he is leaving no stone unturned in preparing his body for the major championships this year. Every training session, every recovery protocol, every tactical preparation is pointed at one thing: performing at the highest level when it matters most. Not grinding through the entire calendar. Not protecting a ranking. Hunting,
went to a third and deciding game.
The moments that define legacies. The lower back remains his most dangerous opponent. The surgery,
Axelsen
the
again
pain,
finished strongly.
The months of rehabilitation, these are not small things. Managing that chronic health challenge while competing at the elite level requires a discipline and a level of physical intelligence that most athletes never develop. Axelsen is learning to compete within limits he never used to have. And in doing so, he has discovered something that many champions never find: how to win differently. There is a version of this story that ends in sadness. A champion diminished by injury, watching younger players claim the trophies that once belonged to him, slowly receding from the sport that defined his life. That version exists. The possibility is real. But there is another version. A version where the calculated withdrawal, the patient rebuilding, the tactical evolution, and the cold mental preparation all come together at exactly the right moment in exactly the right tournament. A version where number 50 in the ranking steps onto the court at a major championship and reminds the entire world why he was untouchable for so long. A version where Viktor Axelsen, at 32, with everything the sport and his own body have thrown at him, produces the greatest performance of his career. That version also exists, and that is what makes this story impossible to look away from. Because Viktor Axelsen is not done. He is not fading, he is waiting, he is preparing, and the rest of the world, whether they realize it or not, is on notice. The champion has not left the building. He has simply been sharpening his blade in the quiet. And when he steps back into the light, fully ready, fully focused, with nothing left to lose and everything still to prove, that is the moment the sport of badminton holds its breath. And when that moment comes, you'll want to have been following every step of this journey. If stories like this move you, stories of champions tested by life itself, not just opponents, then this is the channel.
What a rally.
Subscribe and stay with us, because the greatest chapter of